This is a presentation about Grace Lee Boggs by Diego Iturriaga and Eliana I. Newman.
Grace Lee Boggs was born June 27, 1915 in Rhode Island and died October 5, 2015. She was an author, a philosopher, a feminist, and a social activist. We see within her life that she was able to witness and experience firsthand racism, sexism, anti-immigration, and classism. Grace Lee Boggs was a daughter of two Chinese immigrants and was raised within a predominantly white upper-middle-class neighborhood. Due to her father owning multiple restaurants, they were able to live in this area. Her father, throughout her life, wished to install the sense of pride of being Chinese. Due to this, he was very old-fashioned in his mindset on how the children should conduct themselves and to make sure that they stayed away from being Americanized. We see that she went to high school at Newton High School in Elmhurst, which was a mile away from her home in Jackson Heights. And for college, she went to Barnard College in 1931 for her undergraduate degree in philosophy. She was one of the only two women of color within her class. She went and attended again in 1940 to get her PhD at Bryn Mawr University. For the next portion of when we see her inspiration and struggles, in her early years, Grace Lee Boggs was very heavily discriminated against. We see this because even though she had a degree, nobody would hire her. No one would also let her rent out a space for her to live. She, of course, eventually was able to find a job at the University of Chicago in the philosophy library. She was only earning $10 a day, and she was able to find a place that was rent-free, though it was in the basement and it was rat infested. But despite all this, she still persevered, wishing to let her PhD in philosophy go into a social action. She was unable to find something that matched with her, that flowed, until she stumbled, quite literally, into a meeting of an organization called Southside Tenants Organization. This group was a small little split off of the Socialist Workers' Party, and the goal was to advocate against the rat infestation in New York housing. And Grace Lee immediately signed up after this. And because of this, her continuous workings with them, she became an integral member in the organization throughout community meetings and protests. And from this, we see how she moves into working with revolutionary and witnessing firsthand results of a community banding together to effect a change. And with this change, we see her life going into a new area and her looking at things through a new perspective to go and fight for these changes, especially within the African American community. And through this is how she met her husband, James Boggs, where they both worked together through the Correspondence Publishing Committee, where they both posted by a monthly publication called The Correspondence. Despite multiple splits, one of them being in 1955 and then later one in 1962 of the publication, we see that they knew each other long enough to get married. James Boggs himself was also an activist, such as his wife, so we see how a lot of their ideals mesh together. They did not have any children. When it comes to her literature, Grace Lee Boggs has published many books. The three that really show who she was and who she worked with would be Revolution and Evolution in the 20th Century, New Introduction by Grace Lee Boggs. We see that this is a very instructive review of the revolutions within the 20th century. Each chapter is based on different areas such as the Russian, the Chinese, the Guinea-Bissau, and the Vietnamese Revolution, as they go through and examine the various currents of Marxism that are active within the revolutions. And later on, it is only devoted to the United States, where we see that it has different surveys of the class force in American history, as well as the multiple ideas on objects, how these objects are a means for an American revolution. This book was published in 1974. The next book is State Capitalism and World Revolution. This was by C.L.R. James with collaboration of Raya Dulvosky and Grace Lee Boggs. This is a pioneering critique of Lenin, Trotsky, with some portions of Marxism. This was a way to show the ideals of the time through humanities, and it was a way to understand human culture. This book was published in 1950, and the next book would be Living for a Change, an autobiography. This is her autobiography of how she's translated through class, through racial boundaries, through growing up, and how she pursued her passionate beliefs for a better society. This book was first published in 1998, and now we see a newer version of the autobiography that was published in 2016. She has made many more books, some with her husband. We see through these books her thoughts and ideals.
Grace Lee Boggs' early activism took place in socialist groups, where she connected with the African American community and their shared problems of social acceptance and poverty. She edited a far-left newspaper called The Correspondence, where she would meet James Boggs for the first time. Her work with the Johnson Forest Tendency Group, a Marxist-humanist subgroup of the Socialist Workers' Party, would last for 20 years, where she would write under the pseudonym of Rhea Stone in support of civil and workers' rights. Her connections with influential African American civil rights leaders such as A. Philip Randolph and Malcolm X would put her in the epicenter of the civil rights movement in the United States. In 1992, Grace Lee Boggs would co-found a youth program with her husband called Detroit Summer. Influenced by Martin Luther King Jr., these young people could learn about activism while also doing volunteer work to help their local community through cleaning the neighborhood or offering outreach services. Grace Lee Boggs has received multiple accolades throughout her life for her services in activism and literature. She has been inducted into both the National Women's Hall of Fame in 1999 and in the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame in 2009. 4 different universities have awarded honorary doctoral degrees to Grace, with doctorates in human letters from Worcester College in 2004, Kalamazoo College in 2007, and the University of Michigan in 2009. In 2010, Wayne State University presented Mrs. Boggs with an honorary doctorate in law for her contributions to civil rights for Asian American and African American movements. In 1998, Grace Lee Boggs set up the James and Grace Lee Boggs Center to nurture community leadership, which would support young civil rights activists and teach them how to lead others into their movements. In 2013, the James and Grace Lee Boggs School was created as a tuition-free charter school with a curriculum specifically created for Detroit students. In 2014, students at the New School for Public Engagement in New York advocated for and created the Baldwin Rivera Boggs Center in the Social Justice Hub, inspired by Boggs' activism and designed to circulate activist literature. In 2017, as per requested by Grace Lee Boggs in her will, the James and Grace Lee Boggs Foundation was established to manage the estate and its multiple operational organizations. In 2021, the foundation worked to turn the Boggs' house in Detroit into a museum to memorialize the duo's activism and inspire new generations. The latest project in the Boggs' name was the proposal by the Boggs School to build Boggs Park, with the plan to promote accessibility. Many people have been inspired by Grace Lee Boggs' act in her Century of Life, with some notable names. Barack Obama, former President of the United States, wrote an official White House correspondence eulogizing Mrs. Boggs on the day of her passing. Current Michigan State Senator Stephanie Chang had Boggs as a mentor in her youth, inspiring her to become the first Asian American woman in the Michigan legislature. Dr. Gloria House, a Detroit-based activist and poet, and Dr. Robin D.G. Kelly, a historian professor with UCLA, have both celebrated the work Grace Lee Boggs undertook for Asian and Black movements, and fully support the museum project by the foundation. The sources on screen helped in the research and development of this project. We thank all authors for their respective academic and journalistic work in learning about the monumentally important Grace Lee Boggs.